My dear brothers and sisters in Christ, what I'm about to share with you today changed everything I thought I knew about God's plan for our lives. If you have been feeling like something is different about you, like you've been called for something greater, then this message is specifically for you. Pope John Paul II, one of the greatest spiritual leaders of our time, revealed 3 unmistakable signs that identify God's chosen ones. And I need to tell you something that might shock you. If you have even one of these 3 things, you are among the chosen. Now, I know many of you watching this have lived through decades of change. You've seen our world transform in ways that sometimes break your heart. You've watched as the values you hold dear, the traditions you cherish, the faith that sustained your parents and grandparents, seemingly disappear from society. You've felt like strangers in your own world sometimes, haven't you? But what if I told you that this feeling, this sense of being different, of not quite fitting in with today's world, is actually a sign that God has chosen you for something extraordinary? Before we dive deep into these 3 life-changing signs, I want you to do something for me. Hit that like button if you're ready to discover God's special calling on your life. And make sure you're subscribed, because what we're discussing today is just the beginning of a journey that will transform how you see your purpose in God's kingdom. The comment section is going to be powerful today, I can already feel it. This is where our community of believers comes together to share their testimonies and encourage one another. You know, Pope John Paul II lived through some of the darkest times in human history. He witnessed World War II. He saw the persecution of Christians under communist rule. He experienced firsthand what it means to have your faith tested by fire. And it was through these experiences that he came to understand something profound about God's chosen ones. He realized that throughout history, God has always selected special individuals to carry His light through the darkness. These aren't necessarily the most famous people, or the wealthiest, or even those in church leadership. No, God's chosen ones are often ordinary people living extraordinary spiritual lives. But here's what Pope John Paul II discovered that will amaze you. There are 3 specific characteristics that every single one of God's chosen ones possesses. And when you understand these signs, everything about your life, your struggles, your purpose, will suddenly make perfect sense. I'm going to reveal all 3 of these signs to you today, but I need you to stay with me until the very end, because the 3rd sign, the most important one, might completely change how you see yourself and your relationship with God. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered why certain things affect you more deeply than they seem to affect others? Why you feel spiritual battles more intensely? Why you're drawn to pray for people you don't even know? Why you feel a burden for the state of our world that sometimes keeps you awake at night? These aren't coincidences, my friend. These are signs. The first sign that you are one of God's chosen ones, according to Pope John Paul II, is this: you suffer persecution or rejection because of your faith and values. Now, when I say persecution, I don't necessarily mean physical persecution, though for some of you, that might be part of your story. I'm talking about the subtle but very real rejection you face when you stand up for what's right, when you refuse to compromise your principles, when you speak truth in a world that has embraced lies. How many of you have experienced this? You share your faith with a family member, and suddenly you're labeled as old-fashioned or narrow-minded. You stand up for traditional marriage, and people call you intolerant. You express concern about the moral direction of our society, and you're dismissed as being out of touch. You refuse to participate in activities that go against your conscience, and others make you feel guilty or excluded. I want you to comment below if this resonates with you. Right, I've felt this, if you've experienced rejection for standing firm in your faith. Because what I'm about to tell you will comfort your heart in ways you can't imagine. Pope John Paul II said that this rejection, this feeling of being misunderstood or even ridiculed for your beliefs, is actually a badge of honor. It's a sign that you're walking so closely with God that the world recognizes you don't belong to them. Remember what Jesus said: "If the world hates you, remember that it hated me first." This isn't punishment, beloved. This is confirmation that you are set apart for God's purposes. But here's what makes this even more profound. The chosen ones don't just endure this rejection, they actually become stronger because of it. Every time someone mocks your faith, your roots grow deeper. Every time you're excluded for your values, your relationship with God becomes more intimate. Every time you feel alone in your convictions, you discover that God is your greatest companion. I've seen this pattern over and over again in the lives of mature believers like yourselves. You've lived long enough to see how standing firm in your faith, even when it cost you relationships or opportunities, always led to God's greater blessing in your life. You've learned that the approval of the world is nothing compared to the approval of your Heavenly Father. And here's something beautiful: your persecution often becomes the very thing God uses to minister to others. When people see how you handle rejection with grace, how you love those who misunderstand you, how you remain joyful even when you're criticized, it plants seeds in their hearts. Your persecution becomes your testimony. But let me tell you about the second sign, because this one might surprise you even more. The second characteristic of God's chosen ones is that you possess spiritual gifts that others might not understand or appreciate. Now, I'm not talking about flashy, attention-grabbing gifts. I'm talking about the deep, profound spiritual sensitivities that God has placed within you. Do you have an unusual ability to sense when something is spiritually wrong in a situation? Can you feel when someone is struggling spiritually, even when they haven't said a word? Do you find yourself praying for people or situations without really knowing why, only to discover later that your prayers were desperately needed at that exact moment? Maybe you have the gift of discernment. You can sense when teachings or influences are not from God, even when they sound good on the surface. Or perhaps you have the gift of intercession. You feel compelled to pray for hours for people and situations, bearing burdens that aren't technically yours to carry. Some of you might have the gift of spiritual encouragement. People are drawn to you when they're going through difficult times because something about your presence brings them peace. Write in the comments which of these spiritual sensitivities you recognize in yourself. Don't be shy about it. God gave you these gifts for a reason, and acknowledging them is the first step to using them effectively for His kingdom. Pope John Paul II understood that God's chosen ones often feel like they see and feel things that others miss. You might watch the news and feel the spiritual implications of events in ways that others don't. You might walk into certain places and immediately sense whether there's peace or spiritual oppression there. You might meet people and instantly know things about their spiritual condition that they haven't told you. But here's what's challenging about being one of God's chosen ones with these gifts. Sometimes it can feel lonely. You see and feel things that others don't, and when you try to share these insights, people might think you're being overly dramatic or overly spiritual. But let me encourage you, your sensitivity to spiritual things isn't a burden, it's a blessing. It's a sign that God trusts you with deeper revelation because He knows your heart can handle it. And this brings me to something crucial. If you recognize these first two signs in yourself, you need to understand that you have a responsibility. God doesn't give you spiritual sensitivity and allow you to experience persecution just for your own growth. He's preparing you for the third sign, which is the most important one of all. But before I share that third sign with you, I need you to understand something about the times we're living in. Pope John Paul II prophesied about a time when the world would become so dark, so confused about basic moral truths, that God would need to raise up a special generation of believers to be His light in the darkness. He called them the chosen ones of the end times. Now, I don't say this to scare you, but to help you understand the magnitude of what God is calling you to. We are living in unprecedented times. Traditional values are under attack like never before. The family structure that has been the foundation of civilization for thousands of years is being redefined. Children are being exposed to influences that previous generations would never have imagined. The very concept of absolute truth is being questioned. And in the midst of all this chaos, God is looking for people He can count on. People who won't compromise when the pressure gets intense. People who will stand firm in their faith regardless of what it costs them. People who will be His representatives in a world that desperately needs to see authentic Christianity in action. This is where the third sign comes in, and it's the most powerful one of all. Are you ready for this? Take a deep breath, because what I'm about to share might explain everything you've been feeling in your heart for years. The third sign that you are one of God's chosen ones is this: you feel an irresistible calling to preserve and defend the truth, especially when it comes to faith, family, and moral values. This isn't just a casual interest or a hobby for you. This is a fire in your bones that won't be extinguished. You can't stand by and watch as the foundations of Christian civilization are eroded. When you see children being taught things that contradict God's word, something rises up in you. When you see the institution of marriage being redefined, you feel compelled to speak up for God's original design. When you see your church compromising on essential truths to be more acceptable to the world, you feel grieved in your spirit. But here's what makes this sign so significant. It's not enough for you to just believe these things privately. You feel called to action. You feel responsible to do something about it. Maybe it's through prayer, maybe it's through sharing your faith with others, maybe it's through supporting organizations that defend Christian values, or maybe it's through being a godly example in your family and community. Comment below and tell me, do you feel this calling? Do you feel like God has given you a burden to stand up for truth in our generation? Right, I feel the calling, if this describes what's happening in your heart. Now, here's something beautiful about this calling. God doesn't give it to everyone. He specifically chooses people who have already proven their faithfulness through persecution and who have demonstrated spiritual maturity through the gifts He's given them. If you feel this calling, it means God has been preparing you for this moment your entire life. Every trial you've faced, every time your faith has been tested, every spiritual gift you've discovered, it's all been preparing you for this season where God needs faithful people to stand in the gap. You're not too old for this calling. In fact, your maturity, your life experience, your deep roots in faith make you exactly the kind of person God is looking for. Think about it, you've lived long enough to see the consequences of moral compromise. You remember what society was like when biblical values were more widely respected. You understand what we're losing, and you have the wisdom that comes from years of walking with God. This combination makes you incredibly valuable in God's kingdom. But I want to address something that some of you might be feeling right now. Maybe you're thinking, but I'm just one person. What difference can I possibly make? Or maybe you're feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of the spiritual battle we're facing. Let me encourage you with something Pope John Paul II often said: do not be afraid. God is not asking you to change the entire world by yourself. He's asking you to be faithful in your sphere of influence. Maybe that's your family, maybe that's your neighborhood, maybe that's your church, maybe that's your workplace. But here's the amazing thing. When God's chosen ones start operating in their calling simultaneously, the cumulative effect is incredibly powerful. You see, you're not alone in this. All across the world, there are other believers just like you who are recognizing these same signs in their lives. They're feeling the same calling, the same burden for truth, the same responsibility to stand firm in their faith. You're part of a spiritual army that God is raising up for such a time as this. And here's something that will encourage you. History shows us that God often uses mature believers to accomplish His greatest work. Moses was 80 when he led the Israelites out of Egypt. Abraham was 75 when God called him to leave everything familiar and start a new nation. Anna was 84 when she recognized the baby Jesus as the Messiah. Your age isn't a limitation, it's an asset. You have something that younger believers don't have. You have tested faith. Your faith has been through fires and come out refined like gold. You've seen God be faithful through decades of ups and downs. You know His character in ways that only come through years of relationship with Him. This tested faith is exactly what the world needs to see right now. But let me share something else with you that Pope John Paul II emphasized. Being one of God's chosen ones comes with both incredible privilege and serious responsibility. The privilege is that you get to be part of God's solution in a broken world. You get to be His hands and feet, His voice and His heart to people who desperately need to encounter His love. The responsibility is that you must take this calling seriously. You can't just feel good about being chosen and then go back to living a passive Christian life. God is counting on you to step up, to step out of your comfort zone, to be bold in ways you might never have been before. This might mean having difficult conversations with family members who have strayed from their faith. It might mean standing up in situations where it would be easier to stay silent. It might mean supporting causes or organizations that defend biblical values, even when it's not popular to do so. It might mean becoming a prayer warrior who intercedes for our nation and our world with new intensity. Now, I want to pause here and speak directly to those of you who are recognizing all three of these signs in yourselves. You've experienced persecution for your faith, you've recognized spiritual gifts in your life, and you feel that burning calling to defend truth and righteousness. If that's you, I want you to know that this moment, you watching this video, you recognizing these signs, this is not a coincidence. This is a divine appointment. God orchestrated for you to hear this message today because He's ready to activate you in a new way. He's ready to use your life experiences, your spiritual gifts, and your passion for truth to make a difference in the spiritual battle that's raging around us. But I also want to speak to those of you who might be feeling discouraged right now. Maybe you recognize one or two of these signs, but you're not sure about all three. Or maybe you see these characteristics in your life, but you feel like you've failed God in some way and you're not worthy to be called chosen. Let me remind you of something beautiful about our God. He doesn't choose us because we're perfect. He chooses us and then makes us into the people He needs us to be. Every great hero of faith in the Bible had flaws, had failures, had moments when they didn't live up to their calling. But God's grace covered their weaknesses and His power was made perfect in their imperfection. If you feel like God is stirring something in your heart through this message, but you also feel inadequate or unworthy, that's actually a good sign. It means you understand the magnitude of what God is asking, and you're humble enough to know that you need His strength to accomplish it. That humility is exactly what God is looking for. Now, let me share something practical with you. If you recognize yourself as one of God's chosen ones, what should you do with this revelation? How do you step into this calling in a practical way? First, commit to deepening your relationship with God through prayer and study of His Word. If God is calling you to be His representative in these difficult times, you need to know Him intimately and understand His heart clearly. Spend time in His presence every day, not just asking for things, but listening for His voice and His direction. Second, ask God to show you specifically how He wants to use you. Your calling might be different from someone else's calling. Some of you are called to be prayer warriors, others to be encouragers, others to be teachers, others to be examples of godly living. Don't try to copy someone else's ministry. Ask God to reveal your unique role in His plan. Third, connect with other believers who share this calling. You weren't meant to carry this burden alone. Find ways to fellowship with and support other mature Christians who are serious about their faith and committed to defending biblical truth. Iron sharpens iron, and you'll be stronger together than you are alone. Fourth, don't despise small beginnings. God might start by asking you to do seemingly small things. Pray for a neighbor, encourage someone who's struggling, stand firm in a conversation where your values are challenged. Be faithful in the small things, and God will entrust you with greater opportunities to make a difference. And finally, remember that your ultimate victory is already secured. We know how this story ends. God wins. No matter how dark things might seem in our current world, no matter how overwhelming the spiritual battle might feel, we serve a God who has already conquered sin and death and Satan. Our job is not to win the war. Jesus already did that. Our job is to be faithful soldiers in the battles He assigns to us. Let me tell you something that will encourage your heart. Throughout history, every time the world seemed to be spiraling toward complete moral collapse, God raised up a remnant of faithful believers who turned the tide. Think about the Great Awakening, think about the Protestant Reformation, think about the early church that transformed the Roman Empire with nothing but the gospel and their unwavering commitment to truth. You are part of that tradition. You are part of that remnant. And just like those believers before you, God is going to use your faithfulness to accomplish more than you can imagine. But I want to end with a warning and an encouragement. The warning is this: if you recognize these signs in your life but you choose to ignore this calling, you will miss out on one of the greatest adventures of faith you could ever experience. God has incredible plans for your life. Plans that will bring you joy and fulfillment and purpose beyond what you've ever known. Don't let fear or comfort or the opinions of others keep you from stepping into what God has for you. The encouragement is this: if you choose to say yes to this calling, if you choose to embrace your identity as one of God's chosen ones, you will experience His power and His presence in ways that will amaze you. You will see Him work through your life in ways that will give you chills. You will have the satisfaction of knowing that your life counted for eternity. So let me ask you, what's your response going to be? Are you going to recognize the signs that God has been showing you? Are you going to accept the calling He's placed on your heart? Are you going to step up and be the faithful, courageous, truth-defending believer that our world desperately needs? I believe you are. I believe that's why you watched this entire video. I believe God brought you here today to awaken something that's been stirring in your heart. And I believe your best days of serving God are still ahead of you. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell, because we're going to continue exploring what it means to live as God's chosen ones in these last days. Share this video with other mature believers in your life who need to hear this message. And most importantly, spend time in prayer asking God to confirm these things in your heart and show you your next step. The comments section is going to be powerful today. I want you to share your testimony. Tell us which of these 3 signs you recognize in your life. Encourage your brothers and sisters who are just discovering their calling. Pray for one another as we step into this new season of purpose and power. Remember, you are chosen. You are called. You are equipped. And God is going to do amazing things through your life as you walk in obedience to Him. Until next time, stay faithful, stay strong, and keep your eyes fixed on Jesus.